Thanks for joining me today for another UX Teardown. Today we are going to look at customization of products on a Yard Games website that I found when I was actually researching something for myself. So I am in a lot of UX groups, some professional, some just for newbies in Shopify, merchants who are starting their own store. And one of the questions that actually comes up a lot, probably the thing that I see the most often, is people selling products that they want to customize. So t-shirts, mugs, in this instance, Yard Games, and they want feedback on the best way to structure the layout, to get the information that they're after, and in general, just like how to do that on Shopify. So since we are talking about all things UX, we're going to talk about the layout of this as an option. So there's pros and cons to the way they've done it on this site, but I would say it is probably one of the best layouts that I have seen, especially because they're trying to capture a lot of information at one time, and that can be kind of confusing for people. So we're going to look at the way that this is laid out, and we're going to kind of just go over like the pros and cons, maybe some things that could be optimized, but some things that I think they do really well. Ultimately, though, it always comes back to your specific customer base. So we've got research that talks about, you know, when it's appropriate to use drop-down menus and when it's not, and all of this stuff. But ultimately, it comes down to how do your customers interact with your website. So in some industries, there are things that are really common, and people come to expect that if you were to implement that on another site in a different niche, then it wouldn't work at all. So ultimately, it always comes down to your customer base, what they're used to on your site, and how they interact with it. The biggest thing is making sure that the UI is consistent, and then making sure that things are laid out in a way that is logical for your customers. So we're going to look at this. I chose this one because it offers a lot of options, and this can be really beneficial for people that are offering customizations based on templates, but also want to let the customer choose exactly what they want to do for themselves. Okay, so let's get into it. So a couple of options here. They offer a customized case. So this is just a drop down, yes or no. So drop downs are one of those things where there's research that talks about the number of items that could or should be present to get the most use out of a drop down. But again, ultimately it depends on your customers. Does this work for them? Is this something that exists on other places of the site? So the biggest thing to be mindful of is that you want it to be consistent. So if on this customized section we've got a drop down for these things, then there should be drop downs maybe in other places on the site as well. The issue that we have with this kind of stuff is if it changes throughout the site. So if on one page there's radio buttons, but on another page when there's more options we switch to a drop down, that's when it starts to get a little bit more difficult for people because there's more UI elements to interpret in that instance, and it tends to slow people down a little bit because it's not responding in the way that they expect it to. Okay, so we're going to come down here, and all of this is going to be laid out for us. So the first thing is to choose customization type. So my first thought here is that the radius here for clicking is actually pretty small. I checked it on mobile and it's the same. So the reason that this could create an issue is that if we have someone with an impairment or someone with limited dexterity, the click radius matters because they have a pretty narrow window. So if you're using this on mobile and you're trying to like click on something with your thumb, right, which is like typically how we click on something on mobile, the click radius is like pretty small, pretty confined to this area. So if someone with limited dexterity, or if they're using like a smaller screen, the window that they have to click on is like pretty small to be able to hit it. And so you want that target to ideally be like a little bit bigger. You don't want it so big where it's like bleeding over into other sections on mobile, but you do want it big enough that someone could like pretty easily click on it, and it doesn't create an issue for people with that specific impairment. So that's just kind of my initial thought. So choose customization type. So they have templates, which is really cool that they offer some templates. So from a layout perspective, and from a customer experience perspective, the issue that I have with this is that I don't know what template the family means. So if you spent time, so if you've looked through these, then this would make sense to you maybe. So they have pictures here, and if you scroll to the third picture, this has a picture of a family tree and then a family name on it. So then I could make the assumption as a user that this particular picture is tied to this template. And then we've got ones with like wine glasses. They have initials. So we assume that this is initials. But there's quite a few. And I don't know that anybody is necessarily going to click through all of these. Again, that really is going to depend on your users. Were it me, I wouldn't click through all of these. So while it's cool that they do templates, and they're all probably in here somewhere, I think it would be helpful from a user perspective to surface something that's going to indicate like what that template is, what it's going to look like. So if I click on Vines, it's going to auto-populate here the information that it needs, which is really good because it's laid out really simply. But if I wanted to get a picture of what that would look like, I'd have to look through all of these pictures here to kind of indicate what kind of template is this? What am I looking for? So I would make that a little bit easier to find because I don't know that anybody is going to click through all of these. And even if they do, for them to be able to say, okay, this is definitely the initials template, and this is the location template, or whatever, like that might not be something that people put together. So it is up here. So like, I mean, it does show you, but again, it's one of those things that it kind of just depends on if people are paying much attention to that. So this is good. I would keep this. I would keep the banner here that says what template it is. But I think surfacing something probably over here would also be helpful. Just because if I'm just looking at this, my attention is really drawn towards like this section. So I'm not necessarily even looking up here. And again, this is going to be one of those things where users are going to interact with this differently. There might be some people that see that right away. It took me probably like 3 or 4 times to notice that was there. So let's look at this on mobile and see how this would come up. So on mobile, doesn't look like, okay, so on mobile it doesn't look like, okay, so it's still there on some of them. So some of them are labeled and some of them are not. So it is labeled, but the thing is, if I'm going down here and I'm picking a template, the pictures of the dice aren't actually in my view. So there's a lot of scrolling up and down here. There's a lot of movement back and forth on the page. So again, this is going to be dependent on like how you find that customers interact. So I think that having the banner on the picture is good, but I think to make it easier, I think surfacing something here, whether it's like icons or some sort of information that makes it easy to see like what this would look like. And then we'll look at this in mobile here while I've got this up. So the thing about drop downs is they're not necessarily like good or bad. They have their place for some people depending on your brand and all of that. But the reason that they can become a little bit of an issue on mobile is that like they're presented differently. So for some people, they're going to click on this and it's going to pop up almost like a pop-up. So it's going to like take up their screen. It's going to be really easy to interact with. For some people, their drop down, it will push the screen down and then they have to do like a lot of scrolling. So the difficulty with drop downs is that they're presented so differently across devices that it can be a little hard to navigate that. So they have enough here where it would be, you know, from a research perspective, probably like appropriate to use a drop down. But again, you kind of have to think about how are your other pages set up. Is this the best way to do it? I would, you know, increase the amount of space there to make it easier to click on. So, all right, we'll look at the template. So we'll do location. So the other thing that would be nice if it did is if I click on the template, location, if it would go ahead and bring up this automatically. So I can go through and click on it, but when I switch these, the picture doesn't necessarily switch, and that would actually be really helpful because it makes it easier for me not to have to scroll through here. So it asks for all the information, so choosing the date, so easy enough. You can pick this. You can choose the year. It's nice that you can choose the year. Everybody's been in that situation. They have to scroll back like 20 years and nobody wants to do that. Enter first names, location. So this is where you can add your own, you can customize it even further. So enter custom text 1 or enter your own logo. So this is probably, so they had one I think that was like this, kind of like this, where they have their own logo. So you could upload a file. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll just add in some text here. So I want to see. So I like that it tells you how many characters you've used and what your limit is. So a lot of times that's not advertised, and so people will just, you know, add in a whole bunch of stuff. I can't imagine putting 50 characters on block, but obviously they can do it. I'm not an expert in yard games. Okay, so one of the other things I like about this is that you can see it, and then when you add it to the cart, it will show you your customized options so you can review that, which I think is really helpful, so people can, it's a very quick view of looking at like the information, being able to revise that or review it to make sure it is what you want. So, and then you can add additional instructions, which I think is really helpful too, in case these instructions aren't clear. So again, positives and negatives to everything. What works for one site isn't going to necessarily work for another one, but this could be a good thing to kind of gather some data on when you have enough traffic on your site. Look at like how people are interacting with this page. Do people tend to get to this page and then play around a little bit and leave? Do they struggle to interact with the way that it's set up? And ultimately the answer might be no, like they don't. And that's really what matters more. So just because we've got research, or just because like one brand says we tried this, it didn't work, doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case for your brand. The other thing I wanted to look at really quick is to see if they had drop down. So this one doesn't have a drop down. I was looking to see if anything else had drop down menus, or how they tended to surface those things for other products, but because that one's customized, it obviously has more options. So again, the biggest thing is knowing your customers, staying consistent throughout the website so people don't have new elements to interpret, and honestly just doing what works best for your brand, or just starting somewhere and then gathering information as you go on. But like I said, this is one of the better layouts that I've seen, so I wanted to share it with you today so you had an idea of how to list that information out on the page, especially if you're collecting a lot of information. This seems to be a pretty good way to do it. All right, guys, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.